Nowadays, most people have never heard about the Irish mob unless they were around to remember its last days. Every new group of immigrants to America always seems to have had their own form of organized crime, which had the dual purpose of protecting their people while also preying on them. The Italian Mafia is well known today because they dominated the 20th century, but 100 years before them, it was the Irish who were running the criminal underworld of New York City. But gradually, they lost their power because of two reasons. One was competition from the Italians, and the other was that the children of the Irish immigrants were becoming Americans that were assimilating into the melting pot of society. By 1950, there was just one remaining pure Irish neighborhood left in the city, and the Irish gangsters that ran it did a pretty good job of keeping the Italians out. This was Hell's Kitchen, and things were about to change forever. It was well known that the organization later known as the Gambino Family dominated the Brooklyn waterfront, while the Genovese family controlled most of Manhattan's by the time World War I ended. 50 years earlier, those rackets and that geography belonged to Irish gangsters, but they lost it piece by piece through brutal fighting with their newly arrived competitors. Hell's Kitchen is bordered by 57th Street to the north, the Hudson River to the west, 8th Avenue to the east, and 34th Street to the south. When European settlers first arrived at Manhattan, they found Pleasant Meadows and a spot near today's 10th Avenue and 40th Street, where three streams came together and then emptied into the Hudson River, which was a great spot for fishing. The area was first settled as farmland, and as the city grew, it became taken over by tenement buildings and industries. At the end of that century, it was an overcrowded slum earning its name. By the late 1940s, Hell's Kitchen was the last stronghold for the Irish underworld, including its waterfront. The neighborhood's boss was Eddie McGrath, born in 1906 to Irish immigrants. He dropped out of school in 10th grade, worked under Prohibition-era gangsters like Oni Madden and Bill Dwyer, and spent time in Sing Sing for crimes ranging from burglary to murder. By the 1940s, McGrath had become the recognized leader of a new generation. On paper, he was an organizer for the Longshoremen's Association, but in reality, he ran Hell's Kitchen's criminal operations. He kept the neighborhood Irish while working diplomatically with mobsters like Albert Anastasia, Meyer Lansky, and Joe Adonis. Trouble came in 1947 when three of his enforcers, John Cockeye Dunn, Andrew Squint Sheridan, and Danny Gentile, murdered Andrew Hintz, a hiring boss on Pier 51. Hintz lingered in the hospital for 6 weeks and identified the gunman. Dunn and Sheridan were executed in 1949, while Gentile's sentence was commuted to life. As America entered the 1950s, the public, and then the government, became very interested in organized crime activities at the New York waterfront. Sensing that his way of life as the criminal boss of Hell's Kitchen was coming to an end, and that if he tried to fight, it wouldn't end well, Eddie McGrath decided to move to Florida. McGrath's second-in-command, Hughie Mulligan, was promoted to be the new leader. Mulligan was a shadowy figure who ruled the neighborhood throughout the 1950s. He was well known to law enforcement during his time, and his most notable activity was that he was a fixer, which meant that he bribed cops and judges in order to get them to bend to his will. Around 1960, he left Hell's Kitchen and moved to Queens. It's not clear if he fully retired or if he remained the boss while placing someone else in charge of the day-to-day operations, as he was still having problems with the law right until his death from natural causes in 1973. Whatever was the case, his protégé, Mickey Spillane, then took over Hell's Kitchen, and he became recognized by the people as the man in charge. Born in 1933, Spillane has been called a gentleman gangster, as he was always polite and approachable to the people of the neighborhood he ruled over. He also had some legitimacy with political connections, as he married Maureen McManus, the daughter of powerful Democrat district leader Eugene McManus, though it's said that the father was not thrilled with who his son-in-law was. Spillane banned drug dealing from his small kingdom, and his main rackets were gambling and loan sharking. The waterfront was also a big moneymaker for the Irish mob historically, but by the 1960s, it was severely on the decline. Feeling that he was not making enough cash, Spillane turned to a racket that was ungentlemanly, and it also ended up planting the seeds for his downfall. Spillane started a kidnapping racket. His men would abduct people off the street, hold them, beat them a little, and then release them after a ransom was paid. He even did this to Italian mobsters after they tried to move into his territory, when they sensed a little weakness. One of the regular Irish citizens they abducted in 1964 was an accountant named John Coonan. John was kidnapped, pistol-whipped, and then beaten a little before his family paid for his return. John did not attempt to take revenge, as he felt like he wasn't in a powerful enough position to try without being retaliated against overwhelmingly. But his teenage son Jimmy swore that he would get payback for this. In the Coonan family, Jimmy was the black sheep. He dropped out of school at 17 and chose to make a career out of crime. He was 5'7" and strong. He was well known in the neighborhood as a tough amateur boxer. He became an apprentice for the loan shark Ruby Stein, who provided a lot of cash for the 5 families. Coonan learned a lot while working under this man, and his toughness attracted other young hoodlums who felt that Mickey Spillane and his Irish mob had either did them wrong or were cutting them out. In 1966, when he was just 20, Coonan obtained a fully automatic machine gun and a fully loaded 30-round clip. He positioned himself on a rooftop across from an illegal gambling den and waited for Spillane to make his daily rounds. When Spillane and his crew arrived, Coonan opened fire on them. He missed them all, and miraculously did not kill anyone with a stray bullet. Once the clip in the gun ran out, Coonan fled. Spillane got the message that his life was in danger from this young man. He tried to hunt Coonan down, but his people could not find him. Out of desperation, he even went to John Coonan and belittled him about his son's behavior. The cops soon caught Jimmy Coonan and arrested him for a murder he was part of. He pleaded the charges down to Class C manslaughter and was sent to prison on a 10-year sentence. He would be out in a few years. At the same time, in the legitimate world of city government, it was decided in 1969 that a new convention center was going to be built along 11th Avenue between 34th and 38th Streets. This was Mickey Spillane's land, and this project, the Jacob K. Javits Center, was going to be the start of massive redevelopment in the area. All this construction meant opportunities for labor racketeering and kickbacks. This turned Hell's Kitchen into valuable real estate for organized crime. Cosa Nostra was not happy about the existence of these Irish holdouts of Hell's Kitchen, but before the announcement of this development, the price of conquering seemed too high when compared to the rewards. But with the development of the Javits Center, it was now worth the risk. Fat Tony Salerno tried to come to a peaceful agreement with Spillane where they could share the profits, but Spillane turned the Mafia down. Hell's Kitchen was his, and he didn't want to surrender an inch. He knew about how much territory the Italians had taken from the Irish mob in the past, and he was not going to allow it anymore. He effectively told Salerno to go to hell. What happened next is referred to as the Irish-Italian War, which is a misleading name because the conflict was more cold than hot. While the Javits Center and the redevelopment for the West Side was the gear that turned the conflict, there were years of simmering tensions that created bad blood on both sides. One was the Mafia control of the Teamsters Union. Union truck drivers would take delivery of goods from the docks, and they would sometimes be ambushed by Irish hijackers in Hell's Kitchen. With these vehicles being under the protection of the Genovese family, these acts were viewed as a direct challenge to them. Many of the drivers endured beatings and torture sessions at the hands of the Irish criminals. Sometimes the Mafia would be able to find the perpetrators and get their own revenge. A lot of this violence remained under the radar and out of the public view, as both sides preferred the low profile of street justice to resolve their problems. Between 1972 and 1974, the Genovese family placed silent contracts on the Irish hijackers, disrupting their operations. Knowing that Spillane was providing protection for them in his neighborhood, they also decided to attack his operations by placing hits on his bookmakers along with lower-level members of his organization. Meanwhile, the Gambino family recognized how lucrative the illegal rackets of the neighborhood were, and they wanted a piece of the action. But Spillane continued to lock them out of it. While Carlo Gambino was still alive, he sent intermediaries to try and work out a deal to cooperate together in a partnership, but was refused. Spillane treated the Italians like they were foreign invaders, and Paul Castellano, the next boss of the family, felt insulted by the treatment. By the mid-1970s, Mickey Spillane's organization was dependent on his 3 chief lieutenants for its administration. Those men were Tom Devaney, Eddie the Butcher Kumiski, and Tom the Greek Kapatos. Eddie Kumiski was called the Butcher because in addition to murder, he also specialized in dead body disposal. By cutting up his victims, he made their remains disappear. And without a body, there wasn't a crime for the police to investigate. His vicious nature and the lessons he taught to the younger men working under him would influence the brutality of the Westies in the next decade. The one key advantage that the Italian Mafia held over the Irish mob was organization. The families all had rigid structures, and the Mafia Commission ensured that there was cooperation between them all. In contrast, the Irish mob had a loose structure where criminals felt unity because of shared heritage instead of formal membership. The Irish mob also had a smaller talent pool to draw from. Immigration from the old country was now practically non-existent, and for the families that had been here for generations, their sons and daughters were finding an easy path to the American middle class. A life of crime was just not appealing to many except for the violent and unstable. Spillane met with other Irish gang leaders from Queens and other parts of Manhattan to rally the troops. While most were in agreement that the Italians were encroaching, many were not willing to offer more than token support, as it wasn't their territory under threat. Spillane also had the problem of dealing with an internal threat. In 1971, Jimmy Coonan was released from prison after serving just 4 years. As the Irish underworld in Hell's Kitchen was uniting to face off against the encroaching Italians, he went along with the program while still keeping his hatred of Mickey Spillane. He soon became connected to Eddie the Butcher Comiskey and became his apprentice in dead body disposal. His bold and violent nature slowly won him the respect of the old-timers in the Irish mob. For the early years of the 1970s, the conflict stayed cold, as the only violence perpetuated was against low-level associates from both organizations. The Italians outnumbered the Irish mob in terms of soldiers and power, but to take them over in a direct confrontation would be costly. They needed to be smart. Jimmy Coonan was just 13 years younger than Mickey Spillane, but the two men might as well have been from different generations. Spillane wanted to keep Hell's Kitchen Irish, while Coonan was happy to partner with other ethnic groups to further his interests. And while he was now part of the Irish mob under Spillane's leadership, he was quietly building his own network within it, mostly composed of men that were his age. He had never forgiven or forgot what Spillane did to his father. He hated the man and was quietly sowing discontent in the lower ranks. Somehow, this information made its way to Roy DeMeo, who was then a soldier in the Gambino family. The two men met and became friendly. This news then made its way back to Castellano, who was now the Gambino family boss, and a strategy was formed. Take out the Irish mob's leadership in Hell's Kitchen and replace them with the amicable Coonan. Coonan agreed to the plan, and his role was to fuel the discontent of the soldiers about their current leadership. On the Mafia's end, the Irish freelance hitman Joe Mad Dog Sullivan was contracted to murder Spillane, Eddie Comiskey, Tom Kapatos, and Tom Devaney. Devaney was the first to go on July 20th, 1976. He was stalked for 8 weeks by Sullivan, and on the final day, Sullivan disguised himself with an afro wig and skin dye. He followed Devaney into a bar, where he then shot him in the head. Exactly a month later, on August 20th, Comiskey met the same fate when Sullivan shot him in a bar. There had been rumors that before his death, the man defected to Coonan, and his murder occurred before Sullivan or Salerno could be informed. If that was true, then Coonan did not seem to be upset at all. While these deaths were mob-sanctioned, the use of Mad Dog Sullivan plus his disguises and the staggered time between the hits made it difficult for anyone to connect the dots at the time. Spillane's last lieutenant Tom Kapatos was killed on January 22, 1977, as he walked down 34th Street in Midtown Manhattan. By now, Spillane was cut off from his power base, and sensing that his life was in danger, he left Hell's Kitchen and resettled in Woodside, Queens. But even if he was powerless, he was still considered a threat. On May 13, 1977, someone rang his doorbell, and he went outside of his apartment building to answer. He was shot and killed, with Roy DeMeo believed to be his murderer. Spillane was now out of the way, and Jimmy Coonan was installed as the next leader. From this point forward, the relationship between the Irish mob and Italian Mafia went from conflict to uneven partnership. Fat Tony Salerno took over the rackets from the Javits Convention Center and passed a portion of the profits to Coonan as a fee for doing business in his territory. The immediate effect in Hell's Kitchen from Spillane's removal was a purging of his loyalists so that Jimmy Coonan could consolidate his control. In 1978, it was brutal and violent, with many men simply disappearing thanks to the skills that Coonan learned from his mentor about dead body disposal. But Coonan added his own touch to this method. He kept the hands of his victims so that he could use them to place fingerprints on crime scenes that would give the police leads to men who were long dead. From this point, the Irish mob was now what we know as the Westies, It was a name that was given to them by the media, and they never actually called themselves that. Here, the group went from being independent to becoming a satellite of the Gambino family. Jimmy Coonan was the group's undisputed boss, while Mickey Featherstone was made his second in command. Coonan was determined to be the #1 man in charge, and to do this, he decided to cut ties with the old-timers who helped his star rise. One of his early victims was the New York City mega loan shark Ruby Stein, that Coonan was once a bodyguard for. He was lured into a bar for a meeting with Coonan, where he was shot and killed. Each person there that was part of the murder fired at least one shot into Stein's body to symbolize that they were all in it together. Stein was chopped up and disposed, but later his torso washed up to the shore and was identified. It was later said that Stein was killed because Coonan owed him money, and he also wanted to demonstrate to the rest of the underworld just how ruthless the Westies could be. While Mickey Spillane was generally well-liked and respected in Hell's Kitchen, Jimmy Coonan was a man who ruled through fear. The amount of murders his group committed was reduced in 1979, but their brutality increased. Victims would be tortured extensively before being killed. Their activities were becoming too bold to ignore or tolerate. With law enforcement and the public becoming aware of the Westies and their activities, Paul Castellano met with Jimmy Coonan to formalize their relationship. The Westies would become an enforcement arm for the Gambino family to enact violence, and they would receive a cut of the family's illegal activities. But they had to tone down the killing and stop the cowboy shit. With the Italian Mafia backing the Westies, they were too big for independent Irish criminals to challenge. Not that many would have anyway, as the brutality of Coonan and his crew was sufficient to deter any rivals. However, even with the Mafia regulating the Westies' wave of violence, the group was too big to ignore. Plus, their association with the Gambino family only intensified law enforcement's quest to dismantle them as part of the larger war against the Mafia. Later in 1979, Jimmy Coonan was arrested for the murder of Harold Whitehead. He was tried and acquitted, but he was found guilty of possession of illegal weapons. This resulted in a 4-year sentence. He continued to rule the Westies through his lieutenants. In 1984, the group was under intensive surveillance. At the same time, Coonan and Mickey Featherstone had a falling out. In Featherstone's eyes, Coonan had sold the Irish mob out to the Italian Mafia and betrayed his people. Featherstone's discontent was getting loud and becoming well known to the rest of the gang and the neighborhood. But simply just killing him was going to create more problems than it would solve for Coonan, as it would fracture the Westies. So he came up with another solution to make him disappear. They were going to frame him for murder, and it was going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Back in 1977, a man named Michael Holley got into an argument outside of a bar with Westies member John Bokun. Bokun pulled a gun and shot Holley as things got heated. A police officer on the scene responded to the gunshot by shooting and killing Bokun. Holley recovered from his wound, but the gang blamed him for their member's death. On April 25, 1985, John Bokun's brother Billy disguised himself in a wig and sunglasses so that at a first glance, he would look like Mickey Featherstone. He found Michael Holley walking on the street and shot him 5 times in the back. He then jumped into a getaway car driven by Kenneth Shannon. Mickey Featherstone had spent that day by himself in his apartment watching TV when the police busted down his door and arrested him for the murder. Multiple witnesses identified him as the shooter, and given his criminal record, no one believed his alibi about being home alone. Featherstone was convicted of the murder in 1986. His wife saved him when she secretly recorded Billy Boken discussing the murder and how he wore a wig to look like Mickey Featherstone. She brought that evidence to the police, and it led to the conviction being overturned. Knowing that he was set up, Featherstone decided to get back at Coonan by becoming a cooperating witness for the state. Coonan's original plan to get rid of Featherstone backfired further when prosecutors used it as part of the RICO case against him, since it represented the leader of an organization ordering a murder that was carried out by an underling. This incident was just one of many in the federal case against Jimmy Coonan and the Westies. There were multiple murders, assaults, kidnappings, hijacking, and much more. The evidence compiled over the past couple years of intensive investigation was overwhelming, and Mickey Featherstone was able to connect it all for a jury as he sat in the witness stand. Coonan would end up being sentenced to 75 years in prison. Unlike his first stint, his lieutenants were also removed, which meant that there was no one else to take over his operations. By the 1980s, the Westies had adopted a structure similar to the Mafia, where it's estimated that there were only 15 official members, with all the other criminals they worked with being mere associates. The leadership was decimated, and most of the official crew was put in prison. There were no other Irish gangsters with the power or infrastructure to fill the void. This would have made the neighborhood ripe for the Italian Mafia to take it over, but they were having their own problems because of the commission trial and intense law enforcement. As a result, the neighborhood has been an open territory filled with small-time gangs and criminals that are decentralized. The last days of the Irish mob began when immigration from that country turned into a small trickle. The children of these immigrants ceased being foreigners in a foreign land, and they assimilated into American culture. Combined with the post-World War II prosperity, many chose to leave the old neighborhoods and cities to become part of the middle class with good-paying jobs that didn't involve breaking the law and possibly getting killed. The reigns of Hughie Mulligan and Mickey Spillane were during an era where crime was no longer the only opportunity to get ahead in an unfair world. The new talent for the Irish underworld in the 1950s and 60s were misfits who didn't belong anywhere else. As these men grew up to become the leaders, they were unstable and lacked the necessary management talent needed to keep the organization they inherited moving forward. The fatal wound for the Irish mob was Jimmy Coonan's takeover, and after his conviction, it was effectively dead.